We may speak different languages, but we all understand music. Good day, everyone, especially to our instructor, Sir Jean Edric Castro. My name is Ignacio P. de Guzman III, who will start the discussion with the topic assigned to our group, Group 3, which is all about the Western music from the medieval period up to the Romantic period. So, let us first have our journey to the music of the medieval period. This period is also known as the Middle Ages, referring between the fall of Roman Empire and the age reawakening and discovery. Music at this time is based only upon religious subject, wherein choirs express their faith through beautiful melodies. During the 13th century, magnificent works of architecture, sculpture, painting, music, and poetry appeared. As time goes by, many kinds of music were created during this period, such as music for the knights, for the nobles in the castles, and chants for the priests. And as I have said earlier, that only religious music is the music being created during this period, because only church music are being preserved. Nevertheless, later on, they devised a system to notate and copy music, and that church music be spread out and taught to succeeding generations. Now, to better understand what had happened during this period and the process or development of music it undergone, let us now proceed to the vocal music. Vocal music, or music during the medieval period, is basically based upon the so-called Gregorian chant. So, what is Gregorian chant? It is the official music of the Roman Catholic Church and is being named after the name of Pope Gregory I. It is actually the central tradition of Western plain chant, or sometimes called as plain song. Moreover, an accompanied sacred song is set to sacred Latin text and usually monophonic. So, when we say monophonic, as the word implies, mono means one. So, Gregorian chant is monophonic because it consists only with one voice or music with one dominant melodic voice. It does not have harmony nor counterpoint because it has no official rhythm. Thus, it is sung without any accompaniment and male voices sing in unison. When we say unison, they sing in one pitch like what has been mentioned earlier. It is very plain. Later on, this chant was passed along by oral tradition and were being notated through the use of neume notation. And as you can see in the picture, Gregorian neume is written on a 4-line staff. Speaking of neume, it looks like a tripped over Z and is called aporectus. It denotes 3 pitches. You sing the top left pitch first, then the bottom right, then the top right. Guillaume de Machaut. Guillaume de Machaut is a French composer who has a great influence to the development of music in the medieval era. From the Gregorian chant, which is monophonic, then through him, polyphonic music has been introduced, as he being the first to write a polyphonic setting of the Mass Ordinary. He actually used the Ars Nova technique of isorhythm. So, when we say Ars Nova, it is Latin for new art, and isorhythm is Greek for the same rhythm. Organum. Organum is an early church polyphony. Consists of a Gregorian chant and one or more music lines above the chant. And the soloist sings the original chant melody while the choir sings the other parts in parallel motion. Meaning, in general, it is a plain chant melody with at least one added voice to enhance the harmony. So, from one voice, which is the Gregorian chant, now with organum, which involved 2 musical voices. That is why organum is considered as polyphonic. Motet. It is one new voice above the plain chant, making 3 or 4 voice compositions. It is considered as the most important form of polyphonic music, and it derives from the French word mot, referring to the words that were added to the vocal lines. Meaning, motet is a style of vocal composition that has undergone numerous transformations through many centuries. Typically, it is a Latin religious polyphonic choral composition on a sacred text, usually without any accompaniment. Let's now proceed to the Mass. Mass is the Roman Catholic Church's central and leading worship service. Under Mass, we have Kyrie. We also have Gloria.
Gloria in excelsis Deo.
Et in terra pax hominibus, bone voluntatis, laudamus te.
We also have Credo. We also have Sanctus. And lastly, we have Agnus Dei. And that would be all in the vocal music during the medieval period. Let's now proceed to the instrumental music. First we have troubadours. Came from the word trobar, meaning to compose, to discuss, or to find. They usually perform chivalry and courtly romantic music, and they played for both commoners and nobility. Secondly, we have trouveri. Trouveri are composer-performers. Their counterparts in Germany were called minnesingers. Their songs are about love, crusades, dance songs, and spinning songs. The notation of their songs does not show rhythm. And there were also minstrels and jongleurs who were the acrobat performers and considered the lowest social level. And lastly, we have Adam de la Halle, a French troubadour, poet, and composer, an accomplished composer of ronducs, which is 2-part refrains, chansons, motets, which is polyphonic choral compositions, and jux parties, which is dialogues between 2 parties. Also, during the medieval period, there were various musical instruments used and were available during those times. The musical instruments are divided into 2 groups: the loud or outdoor, or what we call houts, and the soft or indoor, or what we call bass or bass. Under the loud musical instruments, we have trumpet, a long instrument made of metal and is used for fanfares. Here is the sound of a trumpet. Sackbul. It resembles a trombone instrument. Here is the sound of a sackbul. Show. This has a reed that vibrates against a tongue or lips to produce sound, and it resembles an oboe instrument. Here is the sound of a show. Bagpipe. It is made from a goat or sheep's skin and a reed pipe, and this is used by the poorest people. Here is the sound of a bagpipe. Nakers is a drum instrument played in pairs. Here is the sound of it. And tabor is a small drum made from the trunk of a tree or a metal with animal skin. Here's how it sounds. Under the soft musical instruments, we have flute. It's a recorder-like woodwind instrument, and it is the favorite instrument of the minstrels when traveling. Here is the sound of it. Recorder. This is a flute-like woodwind instrument which is held vertically from the lips of the player. Here is the sound of a recorder. Harp, the favorite instrument of the troubadours and minstrels. Hear how it sounds. Fiddle. This is a bowed or locked string instrument placed under the chin of the player. Hear how it sounds. Lute is a pear-shaped plucked string instrument with a bent neck and a fretted fingerboard. It sounds like this. And lastly, we have positive organ. This is the principal musical instrument in monasteries and cathedrals during the late medieval period, and this is the only instrument allowed by the church authorities. Hear how it sounds. And that would be all for the medieval period. I will now give the time to Sir Ian Flores and Sir Aaron Poselio for the continuation of the discussion. They will be talking about the Renaissance period.
Thank you, Sir Ignacio. So once again, I'm Aaron Xavier M. Poselio from BPN 2A. So now I will continue the discussion in vocal and instrumental music during the Renaissance period. So first, let's talk about the Renaissance background. So the Renaissance music is a traditional understood to over from period 1400 to 1600. The Renaissance is a French word which means rebirth. It is a period of exploration, learning, and achievement. So during the Renaissance, the authority and influence of church became less powerful, and the secular music was began to rise. So in the Renaissance period, the vocal music is important than the instrumental music. So now, let's move on to the three important song forms of Renaissance period, which include the madrigal, motet, and mass. So first, let's talk about the madrigal. The madrigal is a secular polyphonic work of a small group of an accompanied singer. It is the most artistic genre of secular vocal music. So the madrigal is a polyphonic word, which means it has many musical lines or equal importance. The madrigal were sung with a lots of imitation, and also the madrigal were performed in a group of 4, 5, or 6. And they sang secular music, which is the non-religious music. So here's the example of madrigal, which entitled "The Fire, Fire My Heart" by Julie Gold.
Fire, 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 my heart, my heart, my heart, my heart, la 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 la, la 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 la, la 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 la, la la la.
So next, let's proceed to the motet. So the motet is a polyphonic choral in Latin text. It can be used in any service of church and usually in a cappella. So the motet is a polyphonic work with 4 or 5 voice parts singing one religious text. So they have a similar to madrigal but with an important difference. The motet are religious work while the madrigal are usually love song. So here's the example of motet which entitled Ave Maria Gracia Plena by Josh Juan Des Perez. So next, let's proceed to the Mass. So the Mass is the Renaissance form of composition wherein the imitation is an important feature. So a musical Mass is like a motet. It also follows the religious service of the Catholic. It is performed in Latin. So here's the example of Mass, which is the Kyrie. So we're done in vocal music of Renaissance. So now we're going to move the instrumental music of Renaissance. So the instrumental music of Renaissance was closely associated with vocal music. During the late Middle Age and early Renaissance, the instrument play along with the vocal part of a song, playing literally the same notes. So the instrument was not seen as a key component, but more as a friendly guide. So the singer didn't sing too much off key. So during that period, the common instrumental genre were the toccata, prelude, ricercar, and canzona. So here's the example of instrumental music of Renaissance, which is the toccata. So next, let's proceed to the musical instrument in Renaissance. So there are 21 musical instruments in Renaissance. The first one is the viol or the viola da gamba. It is a family of bowstring instrument that originated in 15th century Spain. It is looked like a violin family that they have a 5 or 6 string, and they are also played differently, being held upright and played between the legs of like a cello, rather than under the chin like a violin or the viola. So next is the swam. So the swam is a type of double reed instrument that was popular in Renaissance era. It is constructed out of wood. They have a piercing, trumpet-like sound that made them perfect for use in dancing as well as in a military context. So next instrument is the hurdy-gurdy. The hurdy-gurdy features a hand crank turned wheel that produces a sound when it touches the string. So meanwhile, a keyboard is pressed to alter the pitch and play different notes. So these instruments are sometimes used in folk music. So next is the sackbut. The sackbut is a type of trombone which was commonly used during the Renaissance. It characterized by the telescopic slide that is used to vary the length of the tube to change pitch. So the next instrument is the harpsichord. A harpsichord is a musical instrument played by means of a keyboard. This activates a row of levers that turn a trickle mechanism that plunk one or more strings with a small plectre made from quill or plastic. So next is the bagpipes. The bagpipes are woodwind instruments using enclosed reed feet from constant reservoir of air in the form of a bag. The bagpipes are now commonly associated with Scotland but have been played in various places around the world for centuries. But in the Renaissance period, they accompany dances, marches, and outdoor occasions for people of all classes. So the next instrument is the crumhorn. The crumhorn is a musical instrument of the wind family. It is most commonly used during the Renaissance period. The crumhorn is a bit like a chanter section of the bagpipes but without the bag. So next is the recorder. So the recorder remains popular as starter instrument for young children. It is a modern instrument that are often made of plastic, but in the Renaissance era, they would have been made of wood. So next is the lira de braccio. The lira de braccio looked rather like a violin but had a wider bridge, a flatter fingerboard, and generally had 7 strings. The lira de braccio was a European bowstring instrument of the Renaissance. It was used by Italian poet-musicians in court in the 15th and 16th century to accompany their improvised recitation of lyrics and narrative poetry. So the next instrument is the Renaissance harp. The Renaissance harp appeared in a various sizes but essentially resembled in a modern-day equivalent. So when the string vibrated against this pin, it caused a buzzing sound. So the next instrument is the dulcian. The dulcian is a large double-reed instrument made from maple. It would have play instrumental chamber ensemble as well as providing accompaniment for dancing and choral groups. So next is the trumpet. The trumpet is a brass instrument commonly used in classical and jazz ensemble. They are played by blowing air through nearly closed lips, and it producing a buzzing sound that starts a standing wave vibration in the air column inside the instrument. So next is the serpent. The serpent is a large bass-registered instrument with a curved snaking shape. It is made of leather-covered wood and has finger holes like a woodwind instrument, but it is played with a cup-style mouthpiece and its distant ancestor of tuba. So next is the Jew's harp. The Jew's harp is made of metal and it's held against the performer's mouth to make a sound. So the next instrument is the Renaissance violin. The Renaissance violin has a shorter, stumbler neck and a few other differences from the modern instrument, but it is clearly recognizable in appearance and sound. So next is the lute. The lute was the most important instrument for secular music during the Renaissance period. As a solo instrument, the finger-trip plunking techniques enable it to realize that complex polyphonic style that was popular at that time. So next is the transverse flute. So it is similar to the modern flute, but at the stage of Renaissance, it would have made of wood rather than metal. So next is the cornet. So the cornet is a type of modern trumpet. The cornet is made of wood and played rather like a recorder with finger holes. So the next instrument is the pipe organ. The pipe organ, in which pressurized air is driven through pipes of various sizes to produce musical tones. It is used as a part of church service. So next is the Naker drum. The Naker drum was used in military and ceremonial contexts, and in the ensemble featuring louder instruments like swam, trumpets, and the sakbat. So the last instrument is the tambourine. The tambourine is a brain drum with metal around the outside. It would have been played by wandering minstrel during the Renaissance period. So that's all for the vocal and instrumental music of Renaissance. So for the continuation of our discussion, Sir Ian discussed the notable composer during the Renaissance period.
Thank you, Sir Aaron. So once again, I'm Ian J. Flores from BPED 2A. So I will continue the discussion in vocal and instrumental music of Renaissance. So let's proceed to the notable composer during the Renaissance period. So there are 4 famous and notable composers during the Renaissance. So let's talk about Josquin des Prez. So Josquin des Prez, master of the notes, one of the most influential composer of Renaissance, known as the Franco-Flemish composer, being admired by many musicians of his mastery of expression and techniques. He started his career as a singer in different courts in Italy, France, and even spent some time singing in the Papal Choir of Rome. I will show you a video of his composition, Ave Maria. Next composer is Giovanni Pierluigi di Palestrina, he known as Prince of Music, Savior of Church Music. His music is universally recognized as model for clarity and balance. He is the composer of perfect scared music. He spent most of his life as a choir master on Rome, whose focus and great contribution was to return church music to its simplicity and purity, to satisfy the desires of church leaders during the 16th century. I will show you a video of his composition, Sicut Servus. Next composer is Orlando de Lassus, he known as Master of Motet. His music is vigorous, passionate, and earthy. his music was the most widely disseminated. His musical works are Magnum Opus Musicum. His best-known work is Penitential Psalms of David in 1584. His last work is La Grime di San Pietro in 1594. His well-known spiritual tradition musical works is Susame un Jur. I will show you a video of his composition, Susan un Jur. The fourth composer is William Byrd. He known as the father of music and the English Palestrina. He is the greatest English composer of the Elizabeth age. He introduced the Italian madrigal to England. His musical works are Psalms, Sonnets, and Songs of Sadness and Pity in 1588, Songs of Sundry Nature in 1589, Canciones Sacrae and Grandulia. I will show you a video of his composition, Sing Joyfully.
Sing joyfully.
That's all for my report under the Renaissance period. So now, I will give the time to Ma'am Colleen to discuss the Baroque period.
Thank you, Sir Ian. So now, I will introduce myself first. My name is Colleen Manalang from BPED 2A. So, for my topics is all about Baroque period. The Baroque period was started in 1600. The date is very important because opera was developed by Florentine Camerata about that time. The Baroque period ended in 1750 because it was the year of the death of Johann Sebastian Bach. The term Baroque means grotesque or distorted. The word Baroque comes from Portuguese word barroco, meaning mishap and furrow, and negative description of the ornate and heavily ornamented music of this period. During the Baroque era, instrumental music became as important as vocal music. So, Baroque period was the primary composer for three institutions: church, the opera house, and the courts of nobility. During Baroque era, the church was the primary outlet of serious music in Europe. Church was written primarily for organ voice or combination of the two. There are the characteristics of Baroque music. So, Baroque music characterized by long flowing melodic lines, often using ornamentations. Also, contrast between loud and soft. Also, and cymbal. So, and Baroque music characterized by contrapuntal texture where two or more melodic lines are combined. Then, there is dynamic sudden change in the volume level, sometimes creating an echo effect. Then, the vocal music in Baroque. This is the section contains materials that will focus on the major genres of vocal music. You all encounter your study of the Baroque period, namely opera, cantata, and oratorio, and some composers who developed those genres, because Johann Sebastian Bach and George Frederick Handel are generally viewed as towering masters of the late Baroque period. So first, opera. Opera is an art where musicians perform a dramatic composition putting the libretto and musical score accompanied by orchestra or ensemble. Also, opera themes are mostly based on history and mythology. L'Orfeo is the first great opera by Claudio Monteverdi. Next, a cantata. Cantata, from the Italian word cantare, which means song, is a vocal composition for soloist or choir accompanied by instrument. Also, cantata themes are based on narrative poem of secular or religious, lyrical, or dramatic in nature. Next is oratorio. It's a dramatic but and stage telling of biblical or religious story. Oratorio uses a narrator, soloist, chorus, and an orchestra. Usually performed oratorio in churches and concert halls. Great deal of musical similarities between oratorio and cantata, but oratorios are much longer. Handel is the best-known composer of oratorio. Next is Passion. Passion is special oratorio telling the story of Christ's crucifixion, recitative arias and choruses. Bach also includes setting of chorals. Then, we have the musical instruments in Baroque. First, trompe, dopin. It is a trompe de chasse or hunting horn, and the large shape made is easier to carry whilst riding a horse. Second, recorder. The recorder continued to be used in the Baroque period but became a more sweet, softer sounds. clavichord. The clavichord is Western European stringed rectangular keyboard instrument that was used large in the late Middle Age through the Renaissance, Baroque, and Classical eras. Historically, it was mostly used as a practice instrument and as an aid to composition, not being loud enough for larger performances. Next, viols and violin. Even though Baroque-style violin may look similar, firstly, the Baroque violin doesn't have a chain or shoulder rest. The fingerboard is a little shorter on the Baroque violin, and it not raised as high on the modern instrument. The bridge also is high, and there are no fine turners on the tailpiece. Next, flute. In the Baroque era, it became very fashionable for noblemen to learn to play the flute. The Baroque flute has the one key and usually made of ebony and boxwood with ivory decoration. Next, harpsichord. The instrument became much bigger and more power in Baroque era and could have two manuals. The way the sound was produced, quills plucking the string from underneath, remained the same, and so the instrument was still large, incapable of producing dynamics. Next, oboe. The oboe instrument sort of like flute, but with three keys. One is the central key and the two other are either side of it. These two keys actually play the same note and have been duplicated so that the player could play with either their left or right hand upright. So next, the notable Baroque composer. The Baroque era gave rise to many composers whose work are still regularly played. There are three particular notable composers of Baroque period are first Johann Sebastian Bach, George Frederick Handel, and lastly Antonio Vivaldi. Johann Sebastian Bach, as no composer better defines the high Baroque era than Johann Sebastian Bach. Based largely in Leipzig, Germany, Bach was master organ player, among many other instrumental talents, and a composer who created both liturgical and secular music. Bach had a beautiful soprano singing voice, which helped him land a place at school in Nuremberg. Sometimes after his arrival, his voice changed and Bach switched to play the violin and the harpsichord. Here's the example of Johann Sebastian Bach. So next, George Frederick Handel. Born in Germany but notably a Londoner, Handel composed Baroque landmarks like Water Music and Opera Rodrigo. So, He is the most remembered for recite an English language oratorio composed in 1742. His music for royal firework was commissioned by King George II and firmly established his place in British music history. He is the example of George Frederick Handel. So now, lastly, Antonio Vivaldi, a Venetian composer. Vivaldi was famed for his mastery of the violin. His musical composition reflect his instrumental virtuosity. The most famous of these four sessions is a series of violin concertos that is widely performed by today's classical musicians. During his life, Vivaldi made most of his income as an opera composer, where he pushed thematic boundaries in works like 1716 Arcilda Regina di Fonto. Here's the example of Antonio Vivaldi music. That's all for my report under the Baroque period. Now, I will give the time to Ma'am Bondok to discuss the classical periods. Once again, my name is Colleen Manalang from WIPED 2A.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Colleen. So, let's proceed to classical era. But before I start, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Jacqueline Villaflor Bondok from WIPED 2A. Classical era, also called Age of Reasons. The term classical period is generally used to refer to the post-Baroque and pre-Romantic era of music composed between 1750 to 1820, which covers the development of the classical symphony and concerto. Music of this period was generally of an orderly nature with qualities for clarity and balance, and emphasizing formal beauty rather than emotional expression. The term classical denotes conformity with the principles and Roman literature and art which were formal, elegant, simple, free, and dignified. Important of historical events: French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars, the American Declarations of Independence in 1776, the American Revolution. Cultural background: cultural life was dominated by the aristocracy as patrons of musicians and artists who generally influenced the arts. The birth of classical civilization was deeply rooted in the adventurous social, economic, and constitutional restructuring that took place in the archaic period. So let's go move on to the music characteristic. First, harmony and texture is homophonic in general. The dynamics of loud and soft were clearly shown through the extensive use of crescendo and diminuendo. The style of broken chord accompaniment called Alberti bass was practiced and was named after Domenico Alberti. Melody is a short, clearly defined musical phrases with two or more constructing themes. Rhythm, very defined and regular. Texture, mostly homophonic. Timbre, the symphony orchestra was organized into four sections, which is string, woodwind, brass, and percussion. The harpsichord seldom is used. So let's go move on to the classical music has highly sophisticated forms of instrument. Music, these include the concerto, symphony, sonata, etude, symphonic, poem, opera, and others. Overture has three sections: a fast intro, slow middle, and fast ending. Symphony has three, sometimes four movements. The beginning is moderately fast, Next section is slow followed by a minute and then a very fast conclusion. Sonata Allegro, the most important music form of this period. This type of music is written for a solo instrument or solo instrument with accompaniment, having 3 or 4 movements, each complete in itself. So let's go move on to the composer in classical period. We have 3 composers, which is Franz Joseph Haydn, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and Ludwig van Beethoven. First, Franz Joseph Haydn in 1732 to 1809. He is the most prominent composer of the classical period. He is known for his rag to riches story. He came from poor family and his music led his rise in social status. He became musical director for the Esterhazy family for the 30 years. His name or his music reflects his characters and personality, mainly calm, balanced, serious but touches of humor. He composed 100 symphonies and developed them into long forms of a large orchestra. He was named Father of a Symphony. Haydn's composition was Surprise, Symphony, Clock, and Military. The next composer is Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart in the year of 1756 to 1791. He is a child of prodigy and the most amazing genius in musical history. At the age of 13, he had written sonatas, concertos, symphonies, and religious works. He experimented in all kinds of music and composed over 700 works. His composition: he composed wonderful concertos, symphonies, and operas such as The Marriage of Figaro in the year of 1786, Don Giovanni in year of 1789, The Magic Flute, which became popular. The next composer is Ludwig van Beethoven in the year of 1770 to 1827. He was born in Germany to a family of musicians and he studied music at an early age. He was the composer who bridged the late classical era and early romantic era. His famous compositions include 32 piano sonata, 21 set of variation, 9 symphonies, 5 concertos for piano, 6 string quartets, and choral music. His work include the Missa Solemnis in the year of 1880 to 1823 and Opera Fidelio in the year of 1805. Characteristic of Beethoven works: sounds was centered on the violas and lower register of the violins and cellos to give this music in darker mood. All themes in a piece are tied together by one motif. He developed music themes and motif extensive by means of modulations. He used more brass instrument and dynamics. The most important form that developed during the classical era consists of 3 distinct sections, which is exposition, development, and recapitulation. First, exposition, the first part of composition in sonata from that introduced the theme. Second, development, in the middle part of sonata allegro from wherein themes are being developed. Third, recapitulation repeats the theme as they first merge in the opening exposition. Concerto is a multi-movement work designed for an instrumental solo and orchestra. It is a classical form of music intended primarily or emphasize the individuality of the solo instrument and to exhibit the virtuosi and interpretative abilities of the performer. Symphony, a multi-movement for orchestra. The symphony is derived from the word sinfonia, which literally means a harmonious sounding together. It is a classical music for the whole orchestra, generally in 4 movements. So I have here the example of themes from Surprise Symphony. As the 18th century progressed, instrumental music was patronized primarily by the nobility, which led the rise of public taste comic opera. The music was mostly of a simple yet pleasant character, while the singing was highly flexible and sensitive and could freely express emotion through melody. Classical opera. Opera is a drama set to music where singers and musicians perform in a theatrical setting. The two distinct styles of opera was opera seria and opera buffa were developed during classical era. That's all for my report under classical period. Now, I will give the time to Ma'am Jeremy to discuss the topic under romantic period. And once again, my name is Jacqueline Villaflor Bondoc from BPED 2A.
Good day, my name is Gana Jeremy S. And now I'm going to discuss the romantic period. So, music of the romantic period. So, in 1820 to 1900s, continued to use the musical forms of preceding classical era. The emotional intensity associated with Romanticism was already present in the work of Mozart and particularly in that of Beethoven, who greatly influenced composers after him. Music is linked more closely to arts, particularly to literature. Next is the romantic period of music. So, characteristics. First, use of extreme expansion and emotions, a freedom in composing, expansion of the orchestra, emphasis on lyrical melodies. Love, nature, religion, and nationalism are its main themes. It focused on the meaning and purpose behind the music, and its main objective was to get an emotional reaction from its audience. So next is nationalism and exoticism. Romantic period main features. So first, in nationalism, composers use materials from the history of their native country to highlight their culture. Second, in exoticism, on the other hand, uses influence from foreign lands in their compositions. Romantic music in terms of melody and harmony. So, lyrical, poetic, emotional, chromatic, and expressive. Romantic music in terms of rhythm and tempo. So first, compound rhythm, free rhythm, extensive use of accelerandos and retardandos, rubato or the subtle rhythmic manipulation and nuance become popular. So romantic music in terms of dynamics. First, frequent use of crescendos and decrescendos. Second is extreme use of FF or very loud to FFF or as loud as possible. And PP or very soft to PPPP as softly as possible. Next is the romantic music in terms of tone color. So first, diverse mood and emotions. Second is enlargement of orchestra to a richer tone color. So let's move on to vocal forms. First, art song, a composition for a solo voice or piano. Vocal piece or work that places great importance on the written text or symbolic meaning of the text. So next is symphonic poem, also called tone poem, developed by Franz Liszt, an orchestra piece that portrayed a story or it had a literary or artistic background. Next is musical instrument. First, piano, invented by Bartolomeo Cristofori. It can produce both soft and loud sound, unlike harpsichord and the organ. Second is string instruments. Classical instruments were still used, grew in number to balance the sound from the other group of the instruments. Next is woodwind instruments. Composers added the flute, clarinet, oboe, English horn, and piccolo. Next is brass instruments, percussion. Gongs, bass drum, and snare drums were added. Timpani is always used in the orchestra.